A little girl sobbed, pleading, "Please don't hurt us." When suddenly her millionaire father burst through the door and roared. The millionaire father returned from his business trip and froze in shock. Before him, his young daughter, in a filthy, tattered pink dress, clutched her 8-month-old baby brother. Her voice, choked with sobs, pleaded, "Please, don't hurt me and my brother anymore." In that instant, every dark secret hidden within the house began to unravel. Samuel Walker, 43, sat in his sterile office, commanding the top floor of New York's Central Park Tower, one of the city's most opulent buildings. A gold-plated pen and a thick stack of files lay on his desk. He signed each page mechanically, the crystal chandelier's light catching the Rolex on his wrist. His tailored suit fit perfectly across broad shoulders. Italian leather shoes gleamed beneath the desk. Everything about him, from his surroundings to his attire, screamed wealth, success, and power, the very things any American man might aspire to. Yet, his heart felt utterly hollow. Samuel had once known a happy family. Sarah, his first wife, had been the radiant light of his life. Emily, their first daughter, used to chase butterflies in the yard, her soft brown hair bouncing in the wind. Then came Michael, only 8 months old, born amidst profound loss. Sarah had tragically passed away due to post-childbirth hemorrhaging, leaving Samuel feeling as though his own life had been drained. 8 months had since passed, and he hadn't once sat to play with Emily or held Michael. He buried himself in endless business trips, paperwork, and figures, as if running from the pain of memory. During this time, Veronica, his second wife, appeared like an angel. Once Sarah's close friend, she had stepped into the house with a gentle demeanor, soothing everything broken with her sweet, radiant smile. To Samuel, she was the devoted woman he needed. If Sarah had been light, Veronica was salvation. She embraced both children as her own, caring for them with the tenderness of a model mother. Seeing this, Samuel felt reassured. At least the children have a woman at home, he thought, better than growing up with only a cold father. He was eternally grateful she carried the burden he had abandoned. Today, after a month away, Samuel closed the last file. He stood, catching his stained, weary reflection in the tall mirror. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. He wanted to go home early, without telling anyone. He hoped to bring a small surprise. Maybe Emily would rush into his arms. Perhaps Michael would smile when he held him close. For the first time in months, the thought softened him. Samuel grabbed his coat and exited swiftly, before his secretary could utter another question. The luxury car sped along the road, leading back to his suburban estate. That house, once alive with laughter and warmth, was now a place Samuel rarely visited, stopping only between trips. Today felt different. He yearned to see his family. The iron gate swung open, and Samuel stepped into the grand hall. Everything was eerily still. The chandelier's golden glow illuminated the marble floor. He set his briefcase on the table and removed his coat. Then, from somewhere deeper in the house, he heard the faint sound of a child's sobs. "Michael!" The sound pierced the silence. Samuel froze. Amidst the weak cries, another trembling voice followed, small and broken. "Please, don't hurt me and my brother anymore." Samuel's body stiffened. It was Emily, his daughter's voice, choked and pleading. His entire being tensed, his heart seeming to stop. He moved slowly, following the hallway, stopping just out of sight behind the living room doorway. The scene before him made it hard to breathe. Emily, 6 years old, her brown hair tangled, her pink dress stained with date, sat huddled on the floor, her small arms wrapped tightly around Michael. The baby's face was red, his cries relentless, his tiny hands reaching out and clinging to his sister. Emily bowed her head, her shoulders trembling. Standing across from them was Veronica. She wore a tight red dress, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her face heavily made up. But her voice was nothing like the sweetness she showed Samuel. It was sharp, each word cutting like glass. "Shut up! How many times have I told you not to bother me? If you don't listen, I'll throw both of you out on the street again. Samuel rushed forward, placing himself between Veronica and the children. Stop! His voice was hoarse but firm. He reached out, trying to take Michael, his movements clumsy after so long without holding his son. Let me hold him. Emily, come here to Daddy. The girl froze, her fingers gripping the edge of her dress. Samuel hesitated for half a beat, his hand hovering in the air before pulling back, standing protectively in front of them by instinct alone. A flash of venom crossed Veronica's eyes, sharp as a needle. In an instant, it vanished behind a gentle smile. You're back. I was just teaching the kids some discipline. They were being too wild. She stepped closer, placing a light hand on the sleeve of Samuel's jacket, her voice softening like honey. You must be tired after coming home. Don't get so worked up over a moment of childish whining. The doctor said kids need discipline, didn't he? I've been with them all month. I understand their behavior better. Samuel held Michael tightly, his throat burning. He glanced at Emily, saw the panic in her eyes, then back at Veronica's tender smile. She tilted her head, pressing her lips together as if with pity. Or maybe you just feel guilty for being away too long, so everything looks worse than it is. Don't weigh yourself down. Children look at the adults around them. The words slipped out soft as a breeze, but sharp as a blade. Samuel lowered his eyes, swallowing hard. He spoke slowly, struggling to keep calm. I don't want to hear crying like that in this house. Veronica seized the words, twisting them into her excuse. Exactly. That's why I'll handle it the gentlest way. Go take a shower, change, make yourself comfortable. Don't let the kids see us at odds. It's not good for their minds. As she finished, she cast a sidelong glance at Emily. A single faint smack was enough to make the girl bow her head. A snake hidden beneath velvet. And Samuel saw it, though he could not name it in time. He stood frozen, half anger, half guilt tangled into a knot inside him. One painful, haunting question echoed in his mind. What did I just witness? Samuel took a deep breath, adjusted the child in his arms so he would not slip, then stepped into the living room as if everything was still normal. Veronica had already put on a gentle look, her voice warm but clearly forced. You came home early. You surprised me. I'll tell the kitchen to prepare dinner. Sit and rest. I'll take care of the rest. Samuel nodded. He glanced at Michael, who was still sobbing, his chest tightening with the feeling that he had missed something deeply important during the past 8 months. Veronica snapped her fingers lightly, and the housekeeper appeared in the kitchen doorway. It was Mrs. Whitman, an older woman who had worked for the family since the days when Sarah was alive. She was discreet, well-mannered, and spoke little. She bowed gently to Samuel, then returned inside to set the table. Dinner was quickly arranged. The yellow light reflected on the silver cutlery. The smell of chicken soup rose warmly, yet it could not drive away the cold inside Samuel. He sat at the head of the table, Veronica to his right, Emily across from him, and Michael in a small chair, his eyes still wet and unsettled. Eat, sweetheart, so you'll grow strong. Veronica spoke as she placed a piece of meat into Emily's bowl. Her voice was sweet as honey, her smile fixed in place, but the hand she laid on the girl's shoulder pressed a little too firmly. Samuel saw Emily's small shoulders flinch and the spoon in her hand tremble. He leaned slightly forward, observing more carefully. On Emily's left wrist were faint purple marks, stretched like fading bruises. Samuel's heart pounded, and he heard his own voice rise, slow and heavy. Emily, has anyone at school been bullying you? The girl startled, her eyes flashed with fear before dropping quickly. Her voice was small, barely a whisper. No, father. Veronica let out a soft laugh and turned to Samuel. Children bump into each other when they play. I keep reminding her to be careful. Samuel stayed silent, twirling the spoon in his hand. A wave of guilt ran down his spine, knowing that for months he had not been here to notice these little things. Suddenly, Michael kicked his legs, his lips curved downward, and a wail burst out into a long cry. Veronica stood, walked around to pick him up, her hand sliding under his arms but gripping too tightly. The movement was quick but without tenderness, and Michael screamed louder, his face flushed red. "Give him to me." Samuel quickly stood, extending his arms, his voice hoarse and urgent. Veronica glanced at him briefly, then handed the boy over. Samuel awkwardly caught him, his arms stiff like wood after so long without holding his son. Emily lifted her head, her eyes filled with both surprise and hope. Samuel adjusted his hold, bringing the boy closer, rocking him gently. Michael kept crying, but his sobs grew less sharp, and Samuel's own breath slowed with each steady pat on the boy's back. "You're safe now. Daddy's here," Samuel whispered. The words left his mouth, and he suddenly realized how long it had been since he last said something like that. Dinner dragged on slowly. Veronica kept starting conversations to fill the silence, bringing up a new investment portfolio, asking Samuel about his business trip, sometimes turning to Emily with a half-hearted question as if to prove she cared. Mrs. Whitman stood quietly in the corner of the room, her hands clasped together. She did not interrupt once, but when Samuel caught her gaze, he saw in her eyes an unease she could not hide. He was about to call her over, but Veronica had already offered dessert, leaving his question caught in his chest. When the meal ended, Samuel set his napkin on the table and spoke calmly. "I'm going upstairs to change and look over some documents. Emily, make sure you brush your teeth after you finish eating." "Yes, Dad." Emily's reply was faint, her eyes flickering quickly before dimming again. Samuel pushed back his chair, lifted Michael, and handed the boy to Veronica. This time he noticed her hand more closely, her thumb pressing into the child's side with a practiced reflex. Samuel pressed his lips together and said nothing. He turned away and walked toward the stairs, the wooden steps creaking softly under his feet. At the fourth step, he froze. He had heard the faint clinking of glasses, the scrape of a chair, and then Veronica's voice, dropped low, sharp as a blade slicing through silk. "Listen carefully. Remember what I say. If you dare open your mouth to your father, I will throw you and your brother out on the street. I swear it." There was a pause, followed by the sound of quick, shallow breathing, surely Emily's, and then a strangled whisper. "Please, please don't. I'll stay quiet. I won't say a word." Samuel stood paralyzed, his hand gripping the banister until his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded against his ribs as if trying to break free. His mind flashed with the images he had just seen. Veronica's shifting voice, sweet one moment, venomous the next. His daughter's terrified eyes, the bruises on her thin wrists, Michael's cries in arms that were not his own. Downstairs, Veronica's tone shifted again. She gave a thin laugh and spoke louder, just enough for her words to slip through the stairwell. "Good. Finish your food, and then I'll give you dessert." Samuel still did not move. Sweat dampened his palms, even though his body felt cold. He swallowed hard, but his throat stayed dry. His anger and guilt wrapped around him, squeezing until he could hardly breathe. Mrs. Whitman stepped softly out of the kitchen, her shoes making almost no sound. She paused, her eyes lifting briefly toward the staircase as if she knew someone was there but dared not look directly. She placed a folded towel on the lower banister, a small, discreet gesture that felt like a message. Samuel bit hard on the inside of his cheek to steady himself. He knew he could not simply walk away as if nothing had happened, yet he also understood that a single outburst now might frighten those trembling little hands even more. He tightened his grip on the railing, drew in a long breath, and forced the breaking wave inside him back down. And so he remained there, on that step, listening to the pounding of his own heart, the faint clatter of a spoon against a bowl, and the rise of a new and unmistakable command within him, a vow he could not delay even one more day. Samuel's hand still gripped the banister. He inhaled deeply, released it, then returned to the dining table and spoke a short sentence to bring dinner to an end. After that, he went into the study, closed the door, and stood in silence for a long time by the bookshelf. That night he did not sleep, only listening to the small footsteps of his children and the whispers echoing down the hallway like needles piercing skin. When the sky turned pale, he washed his face with cold water, adjusted his collar, and walked straight to the kitchen. Mrs. Whitman was placing dishes onto the wooden shelf. She was the elderly housekeeper who had lived in this home since the time Sarah was a young bride. She was quiet, meticulous, and always kept the proper boundaries. Hearing Samuel's steps, she froze, her thin, dry hand still holding the cloth. "How were the children while I was away?" Samuel asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes could not hide the exhaustion. She hesitated, looked down, then sighed. "Do you want the truth?" Samuel nodded. "I only want the truth." She set the cloth down, speaking slowly so as not to stumble over her emotions. Some nights, Miss Veronica made the girls stand on the porch for a long time, just for dropping a spoon. One night, I found her holding her little brother, sleeping in the storage room because their bedroom was locked. Many times Michael was given only very diluted milk. He cried from hunger until he fell asleep. I tried to intervene, but she told me I had no right to interfere with her way of raising them. Samuel felt his heart clench. The image of Sarah holding a bowl of porridge, lifting Emily onto the chair, smiling as she told a bedtime story, came back like a blade cutting through memory. He swallowed, keeping his voice even. "Did you hear her make any threats?" "Yes." Her answer was soft, her eyes still fixed on the cloth. "She said if the girl ever told you, both children would be thrown out. She also threatened to fire me if I ever spoke of it. I truly am sorry, sir. She is far too cunning." Samuel shook his head, resting a hand on the back of a chair to keep it from trembling. "It is not your fault. From now on, if anything happens, you tell me directly, and if necessary, would you be willing to testify?" She raised her eyes, and in them was a quiet resolve. "For the children, I am willing." That entire day Samuel moved through the rooms as if inspecting an unfinished work site. He called his office, postponed every meeting, excusing himself with family matters. He went into the children's room, opened the closet to check blankets, examine the bottles, and took notes in a tight, pressed script. Every small trace was like an accusation. Veronica smiled at him softly, inquiring about his work, but Samuel said little. He told her they would talk later and asked the kitchen to prepare a light dinner. He did not want to cause noise. He wanted to see clearly. The night fell very slowly. In the study, Samuel pushed the files aside until only the small frame of Sarah remained before him. He placed his hand on the wooden surface. An apology lodged in his throat. The desk lamp lit the lines at the corners of his eyes. Outside in the hallway, the wind whistled faintly through the crack of the door. Then came the sound of hesitant steps, stopping at the threshold. The door opened slightly. Emily stood there, holding Michael tightly as he dozed, her eyes swollen and red, as if she had been crying for a long time. Samuel rose quietly, afraid of shattering the fragile shell wrapping his children. He took Michael into his arms, feeling how light the boy's body was and how uneven his breath came from exhaustion. The faint smell of watered-down milk clung to his collar. He motioned for Emily to sit, pulling a chair so they could be at eye level. But the girl still sat on the edge, her back stiff, her eyes flicking often toward the door. "Dad!" The small call was barely a fragment of breath. Then it faded. Samuel nodded, as if to say there was no need to force out more words. He patted Michael's back in an even rhythm, catching the faint gurgle of the boy's stomach. Emily pulled her sleeve down to cover her wrist, her fingertips brushing the frayed hem of her dress, her legs drawing up at times when a distant sound stirred in the hallway. The air in the room was thick with pauses, as if every sentence wanted to rise but then retreated again. Samuel handed her a cup of warm water. Emily received it with both hands, sipped a tiny swallow, her eyes still fixed on the outline of the door frame as though expecting someone to walk in. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions but stopped himself, afraid that even one misplaced word might make her retreat further. He chose instead a neutral phrase, light as placing a blanket over her shoulders. Sit here, where it's warm. The girl nodded, let out a short breath, then lowered her eyes as her sleeve slipped back. A purple mark surfaced for a moment, and then vanished like a fish diving into dark water. Samuel saw it, but pretended not to, his chest tightening with partial understanding and with the weight of not yet having enough proof to name the rest. Michael drifted into drowsy sleep, his small hand clinging to Samuel's collar as though it were the last anchor he had. Samuel stayed perfectly still, afraid that even the smallest movement might wake the fragile fears trying to lie quiet. It's safe here. His voice was just above a whisper, its warmth carrying more than the words themselves. Emily gave a faint nod, her lips quivering as though she meant to speak, but then she fell silent. Outside, the wind slipped through the crack of the door in a thin line, rattling the key hook. The girl flinched, her hand curling back in a reflex born of long practice. Samuel reached out, intending to rest a light touch on her wrist as reassurance. Emily recoiled slightly, her chair creaking the softest sound. He froze instantly, his hand suspended in the air, then withdrew it as though from a flame. The silence thickened with another layer. Inside his chest, a question broke loose. When did the distance between father and daughter become this wide? My own child. Is she afraid of even my hand? Samuel stood still for a long time after Emily pulled her hand away. He drew in a deep breath, placed Michael back in the crib, and pulled the blanket over him. Emily sat curled up on the chair, hugging her knees, her eyes still swollen. Samuel bent down, speaking slowly so she could hear him clearly. Sleep here tonight. I'll be right next to you. Emily nodded, her hands clasped tightly together. Samuel dimmed the light, closed the door to his study, and walked into the empty hallway. The silence of the night seemed to swallow every breath. He could not sleep. Images of Sarah and her warm smile rose again and again out of the darkness. He opened the door to his late wife's old room. A faint fragrance still lingered on the shawl that hung behind the door. Samuel opened the wardrobe and pulled out the small drawer where Sarah used to keep Emily's cards. A thin envelope slipped off the edge of the drawer, caught against the wooden rim. On the front was the handwriting he knew so well. To Samuel. He froze. His hand trembled as he opened the letter. The slanted handwriting seemed like Sarah's voice speaking to him. If I am no longer here, please protect Emily and Michael. Do not place your trust too quickly in anyone. Believe in your child's eyes. When she is afraid, she will not know how to lie. Samuel sank down onto the floor, the paper quivering with his breath. His mind filled with the sight of Emily clutching her little brother, her dress torn and filthy, her eyes wide with fear. Michael had felt so light in his arms, his breathing broken from hunger and exhaustion. A wave of grief surged through him, no longer a vague sense of guilt, but a sharp, searing ache of fatherly love that tightened his chest. He pressed the letter against his chest, closed his eyes as if hearing Sarah's voice guiding him word by word. I am sorry, Sarah. From now on, I will protect our children. He opened his eyes, stood, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, as though sealing a vow. His hand brushed the picture frame on the shelf. From that moment, the decision became simple. He would return to being a father in the truest sense. He held the letter against his chest for a long time, until the hallway light flickered faintly with the wind. When he finally rose, his back ached, but inside him a cord had tightened, pulling him straight forward. The next morning Samuel woke early. He brewed coffee, listening to Mrs. Whitman's footsteps in the kitchen, the faint clink of a spoon. Veronica appeared soon after, neatly dressed, smiling as usual. Did you sleep well? Today I'll take Emily to her music class. Let's have an early dinner tonight. Samuel gave a restrained smile. I have things to do at home. You keep to your schedule. He said nothing more. All day he remained calm, as if smoothing the last crease on a suit, yet his eyes never left Veronica's movements. By mid-afternoon, she received a call, lowering her voice. All right, 10 minutes in the back garden. Samuel stood on the porch, a coffee cup in hand. He changed course, cycling along the stone path, and stopped behind the row of poplars. The back lawn was still, without wind. A stranger entered through the side gate, a man in his 30s wearing a dark coat, a thin bag slung over his shoulder. Veronica approached him, her smile no longer the gentle one she wore inside the house. Right on time, Caleb. The man shook her hand quickly. I only have 10 minutes. Are you sure about the authorization? Veronica lowered her voice. It's a large sum. I want to bring it in early. The trust is under Walker's name. If the signature is transferred, I'll gain control. Caleb glanced around, then pulled out a thin stack of papers. I need more proof you have the right. The marriage certificate is there, but the proxy's signature for the family fund is still missing. Walker isn't a fool. Veronica gave a cold smile. Don't worry. He's busy playing the perfect father. As for the rest, I'll get it another way. Caleb folded the papers. No more than 2 weeks. After that, the plan will be harder. Thank you. Veronica touched his hand with a familiar gesture. Keep it quiet for me. Samuel stood behind the trees, his heart pounding heavily. He had heard enough to understand where the blade was pointing. It wasn't just the shouting in the kitchen, not just the threats on the stairs. This was a step across another line. Caleb left through the side gate. Veronica lingered a moment, adjusted her hair, then walked back into the house with a calm face. Samuel still didn't move. He opened his phone, the black screen reflecting his own face. 3 tasks lined up in his mind as straight as ruled lines. Protect the children, preserve the evidence, and call an old friend who knew the law. He went back inside, passing through the living room. Emily was stacking wooden blocks for Michael, glancing now and then toward the kitchen. Her eyes flicked toward him, still carrying some caution, but there was also a small glimmer. Samuel paused for a second, laying his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. You're here with me. Emily nodded, her lips forming a faint word. Yes. Samuel kept walking, his hand gripping Sarah's letter inside his jacket pocket. His heartbeat surged, not from fear, but from a late awakening turning into action. He knew what he would have to face, and he understood something else. Chilling in its simplicity, she isn't only mistreating my children, she is plotting for the inheritance too. Samuel tightened his grip on the letter in his pocket and walked straight toward the living room. He stopped beside the play rug, bent down to pick up a wooden block that had rolled away, and placed it in Emily's hand. His voice lowered to reassure her, You stay here with Daddy. Emily gave a slight nod, her eyes darting toward the kitchen as if to check whether anyone was listening. That night, Samuel stayed in the living room longer than usual. He sat beside them, opened a children's book that Sarah used to read to Emily years ago, and read slowly, letting each word linger. His other hand tapped a steady rhythm on Michael's back until the boy's breathing became calm and even. Every time footsteps passed by, Emily stiffened, her little hand clutching at the hem of her dress, her gaze shifting to the window as if searching for an escape. Seeing this, Samuel whispered, It's all right. Daddy is here. Veronica passed by once. She smiled faintly and asked as though in passing, It's late. Let me take the children to their room. They have school tomorrow. Samuel looked up, his tone deliberately calm. I'll do it. Veronica shrugged and turned away, leaving behind a trace of perfume that could not mask the unease beneath her polished manner. Mrs. Whitman came carrying a warm glass of milk. She placed it on the table by the chair, her eyes glancing at the door before meeting Samuel's, as if to remind him not to let the children out of his sight. Samuel thanked her, urged Emily to take a few sips, then placed Michael in the portable crib, pulling it close beside his chair. He finished the page of the story in a steady, low voice. When the clock struck late, Samuel carried Michael and guided Emily toward the children's bedroom. The door stood ajar, the room tidy but cold. He straightened the blankets, laid the boy in the crib, pulled a small chair close for Emily to sit beside the bed, and spoke slowly. Daddy is right here. Go to sleep. Emily nodded, but before closing her eyes, she still glanced outside as if waiting for some sound. Samuel dimmed the hallway light, stood at the doorway a while longer, then returned to his study, deciding to move his chair closer to the door so that with one glance he could still see the faint light spilling from the children's room. Near midnight, Samuel lifted his head from the stack of papers when he heard a faint metallic clink at the end of the hallway. He rose quickly, following the sound, his heartbeat racing. Before he could steady himself, someone had turned off the hallway light, leaving the space blurred in shadow. Samuel flicked the switch, and the sudden brightness made him squint. In front of the children's room, Emily was sitting hunched on the floor, clutching Michael tightly, the baby hastily wrapped in a thin blanket. Her eyes were red, her cheek pressed against her brother's forehead to keep him warm. The lock on the outside of the door clicked just as it released, and Samuel understood at once. "Who left you out here?" Samuel asked, his voice hoarse with anger, though he managed to restrain it. She locked the room," Emily whispered, each word catching in her throat as her arms tightened protectively around her brother. Samuel knelt, gathered them both, holding Michael firmly against his chest while lifting Emily up with his other arm. "Come with Daddy." He carried the children back to his room, pushed the door until it met the frame, and locked it softly. Moving slowly so as not to startle them, Samuel laid Michael in the middle of the bed, propped soft pillows around him, and pulled the blanket to his chest. He slid a chair close for Emily beside the edge of the bed, then poured the rest of the warm milk into a small cup. "Drink a little before you sleep. You're tired already." Emily clutched the cup with both hands, her lips pressed tight to hold back a sob, her eyes fixed on her father's mouth as if waiting for a clear promise. Samuel sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on the blanket covering his daughter's legs. He did not touch her skin for fear she might flinch, but he left the warmth of his hand there like an invisible thread connecting them. "I'm here tonight. You'll sleep in my room," in the softened glow of the night lamp. Emily looked up, her gaze lingering on the face of the man who had only appeared in brief flashes over the past 8 months between work trips. Her voice trembled, breaking at the end of the sentence. "Dad, are you going to abandon us like my stepmother said?" Samuel froze, his breath caught in his chest. Words so natural before now vanished. For a long moment, he could only pull the little girl closer and hold her against him. His chin rested on the crown of her head, the familiar scent of milk and child sweat burning his eyes. He did not know how to answer without sounding late, without sounding false. He only repeated the one thing he could be certain of, "I'm here." Emily gave the faintest nod, her small hand gripping the hem of his shirt like holding on to a piece of driftwood. Michael stirred, let out a faint murmur, and drifted back into sleep. Samuel stayed still, listening to the breaths of the two children blending together, his own heartbeat slowing and heavy, like a silent promise being signed again in the dark. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps stopping right outside the bedroom door. Samuel tensed instinctively, his arm tightening protectively around Emily's shoulders. Through the crack in the door came Veronica's voice, smooth as silk yet cold as thin steel. "I think we need to talk, Samuel." Samuel gently squeezed Emily's shoulder to reassure her, then sat her down on the bed and pulled the blanket up for Michael. He stood, opened the door just enough for Veronica to see him. "The kids are asleep. Whatever it is, we'll talk in the morning." Veronica smiled, stepped back, her voice still soft. "As you wish." The door closed. Samuel sat down in the chair, pulled out his phone, and dialed a familiar number. "Richard, come by my house tomorrow evening. There's something in the portfolio we need to discuss." On the other end, the man answered briefly, "All right, 7 o'clock. Richard Coleman was a corporate attorney in his 40s, discreet and straightforward. He had been with Samuel since his earliest deals, understood how Samuel thought, and could read details most people overlooked. He wasn't only skilled with contracts but also deeply knowledgeable about family trusts and asset protection, which was why Samuel believed Richard's presence would be far more valuable than a polite dinner. The next evening, Veronica took charge of the kitchen. She chose a white tablecloth, arranged red roses, and set gleaming silverware in place. When Richard arrived, Veronica came out to greet him with just the right smile, carrying the poise of a perfect hostess. "Such a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Coleman. Please, come in." Richard shook Samuel's hand, his gaze sweeping the room before stopping at the corner where Emily was holding Michael. He nodded to the children with a warm smile. Dinner began with soup. Veronica was attentive to every gesture in front of the guest. She placed the tenderest piece of meat into Emily's bowl, bent down to wipe a trace of milk from Michael's lip, and spoke with honeyed sweetness. "Eat up, darling, so you'll grow strong." Emily replied softly, "Yes," then tried to lift a small spoonful. Samuel glanced over. On his daughter's shoulder, Veronica's hand seemed casually placed, but her fingers pressed down hard enough to make the fragile muscle tighten. Emily's face tensed. The spoon trembled. Samuel kept his expression calm, as if he hadn't noticed, but a burning heat rose in his chest. Richard filled the silence with business talk. "I reviewed the infrastructure fund update. The allocation is leaning too heavily toward bonds. How long are you planning to stay defensive?" Samuel answered briefly, while setting his hand on the table as a signal. "I need to review the structure of the family trust. I'll have you look it over." Veronica's eyes flicked quickly, then she smiled again. "Mr. Coleman, you're always so thoughtful, always keeping the family security in mind." When the main course was served, Richard turned to ask the chef about the sauce. He looked away for just a moment. Veronica leaned close to Emily's ear, her voice as thin as a blade. "Remember this, if you so much as whisper a word, your little brother will pay the price." Emily froze, lowered her spoon, her eyes downcast. From that moment on, she ate no more. She sat silently, her hands tucked under the table to cover her wrist, still marked with old bruises. Samuel noticed the motion. He lifted his glass of water, concealed a long, steady breath, and set it down firmly in its place, as if placing a small period on the decision he had just made. After dinner, Veronica poured tea. "I'll take the children upstairs first." She bent down, picked up Michael, and smoothed Emily's hair in front of the guests. "Come on, sweetheart." Emily stood up. Before leaving, the girl glanced at Samuel for a second, her eyes waiting as if asking whether it was safe. Samuel gave a small nod. "Go on, I'll be up later." The living room was left with just the two men. Richard set his teacup down, leaning back slightly into the chair. He talked a bit more about the fund, then lowered his voice. "You want me to review the trust structure, don't you?" Samuel answered shortly, "Yes, and also the power of representation." Richard nodded. "All right, but let me ask you this." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Samuel. "Since the moment I walked into this house, I saw a child flinch, his shoulders in reflex from pain, an infant being held the wrong way, and a lady of the house controlling every glance. Did you call me for money, or for something else?" Samuel stayed silent for a few seconds. He placed two fingers on the edge of the table to keep rhythm, then spoke slowly. "Both, but the latter matters more." Richard didn't rush. He pulled a small notebook from his briefcase and opened to a blank page. "Then let's begin with the truth. Tell me what you've seen, what you've heard, and who you want to protect." Samuel recounted in short fragments, without adding or omitting, the words on the staircase, the lock on the outside of the bedroom door, the bruises, and the threat just now. Richard jotted down a few key words, never interrupting, only nodding when needed. Veronica retained, smiling at the two men. "Do you need anything else?" Richard replied politely, "Thank you. The tea was very good." She closed the door behind her. He waited a beat before continuing, lowering his voice further. "My friend, I'm afraid your second wife is hiding much more than she lets on, and I can help you uncover the truth." Samuel looked straight at his friend. In his eyes, the burning anger had settled into a cold determination. "Where should we begin?" Richard left around 9 o'clock. Samuel walked him to the door, kept his hand on the knob for a moment to steady his breath, then turned back into the house. He opened the children's room door slightly, saw Emily and Michael already asleep, pulled the blanket up to his daughter's shoulders, and placed the teddy bear back beside her. Then he closed the door and went straight down to the living room. Veronica was pouring wine, the crystal glass casting a dark red reflection. "I need to talk to you right now." Samuel stood across from her, his voice low and firm. "Emily has a bruise. Explain it to me." Veronica set the glass down, the corner of her lips lifting. "Are you accusing me? I spent the whole day here with the kids. Did you see me cooking, bathing them, watching when they cried?" She grabbed the glass again and slammed it down hard on the table. The stem cracked with a sharp sound, the wine splashing across the surface. "I'll ask again." Samuel did not look away. "What did you do to my child?" Veronica let out a dry laugh. "Do you really think I want to take care of Sarah's children? Can't you see, from beginning to end, you never chose me. You only chose her shadow." Samuel froze for a moment. He placed 2 fingers on the table to steady his rhythm. "Stay on point. Answer why the girl has a bruise." "Children fall." Veronica folded her arms. "Besides, she's stubborn. She needs to learn to obey. I teach her the way a mother teaches a child." "A mother?" Samuel tilted his head. "Are you talking about Sarah? She taught them by holding them and speaking with them, not by locking doors and threatening." For a brief second, Veronica's face shifted, then turned cold. She leaned forward, her voice cutting. "Sarah, always perfect, gentle, intelligent. Everyone adored her. And me? I was nothing but her shadow. Did you marry me out of pity, or because Sarah asked you before she died?" Samuel kept silent for a few seconds, letting the weight of the truth settle. He spoke slowly, each word striking with precision. "I married you because I thought the children needed a woman in the house. I was wrong. And tonight, I corrected it." Veronica burst into laughter, her voice thick with resentment. "Corrected how? By throwing me out? Do you think the court will believe you? You were away for a month on business. Who cared for the children? Me. Who fed the baby his milk? Me. And where were you? Hiding in your gilded office." Samuel did not back down. "You know why I called the lawyer here tonight. You know what I saw, and you also know what I heard." Veronica slammed her hand on the table. "Fine, then listen closely." She spat out each word, her eyes blazing as if they were about to shatter. "I hate her, and I hate those 2 children who carry Sarah's face even more. Every time I look at them, I feel like I've lost. I was by your side when you collapsed while she lay cold on a metal table, but you never once looked at me as the one you chose. Never." Samuel exhaled long and pained. "You're right about one thing. I didn't choose anyone. I only ran from grief. But from tonight on, I choose to stand with those children. I won't let anyone hurt them, not even you." Veronica tilted her head, her smile stretching like a cut across her face. "You think you can take everything back? You forget I am the legal wife. I have rights in this house, in this trust. If you want to fight, I'm ready." "Tomorrow," Samuel said, his voice flat and cold. "I'll meet with the lawyer about the trust and guardianship. I'll also speak with the police about abuse, if necessary. You should prepare yourself." "You wouldn't dare." Veronica sneered. "You'll humiliate yourself in court. People will say Samuel Walker couldn't keep his wife, couldn't keep his house, couldn't keep his children. Can you live with that?" "I can live with their words." Samuel lifted the napkin and set it down neatly, as if signing something in silence. "What I cannot live with is the sound of my children crying." Veronica faltered for half a beat, then flayed again. "Then just wait and see who ends up thrown out of this house." A soft creak of wood on the stairs made them both turn. On the landing, Emily stood pressed against the banister, clutching her teddy bear. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. The small hand slid across the bear's fur, and the toy nearly tumbled down the steps. Emily bent to grab it, her hands trembling so badly that even when she hugged it tight, it still slipped. Samuel took a step toward the stays, his hand lifting on instinct. Veronica's smile sharpened into something cruel. Neither of them said another word. The air froze around the ragged breaths of a child trying not to cry. Samuel managed to catch the teddy bear, placed it back into Emily's hands, and whispered for her to return to her room. He closed the door, leaned against it for a few seconds to steady his breathing, then dialed Richard's number. "We start the process tomorrow morning." On the other end, Richard gave only a short reply. "See you at Lincoln, 9 o'clock. The next morning, the family court hallway in Lincoln smelled of paper and weak coffee. Richard Coleman walked beside Samuel, holding a thick file that already included Mrs. Whitman's statement and photos of the bruises. Emily clutched Samuel's hand while Michael had been left with a court-appointed babysitter. Outside the courtroom, Veronica arrived with a man in a dark blue suit, her attorney named Alan Pierce. She wore light makeup, held a tissue, and her eyes glistened just enough in the right places. "Case number 14, Farad," the clerk called out. "Walker petitioning for emergency protection for minors. All four walked in." "All rise." The guard's voice was steady. Judge Eleanor Myers sat above them. She was about 50, with bright eyes, a woman who spoke little but observed much. Richard began, "Your Honor, we request an emergency protection order and restrictions on contact for the respondent, Veronica Hayes, on the basis of emotional abuse and neglect. We have the housekeeper's testimony, photographs of the injuries, and a letter from the plaintiff's late wife as context." Alan lifted his chin, cutting in immediately. "Your Honor, my client is a devoted stepmother. These accusations are speculation. There is no direct evidence." Veronica dabbed at the corner of her eye. "The girl is sensitive, Your Honor. I only disciplined her as any mother would." The judge nodded. "Call the witness." Mrs. Whitman stepped up to the stand, her hands clasped together. Richard asked concisely, "What did you see?" "I saw the girl repeatedly forced to stand outside on the porch. One night she had to sleep in the storage room with her brother because her bedroom door was locked. The boy was often given only watered-down milk. I heard Mrs. Veronica threaten to throw them out if the girl told her father." Richard asked, "You are certain it was the respondent's voice?" "Yes. I was 2 meters away." Alan approached, his tone flat. "How old are you?" 62. Could your memory have been mistaken in a dark hallway, a mumbled number?" Her answer was short. "I worked in that house for 10 years. I do not mistake her voice." Alan raised his brow. "Do you have any personal grudge against my client?" "No. I am only afraid for the children." Richard presented a stack of photographs. Photographs of bruises on Emily's left wrist, taken 2 days ago, time-stamped. The judge examined them carefully, tilting her head slightly. Alan quickly counted. "Children run. They fall. Injuries are normal. The photos don't prove who caused them." Veronica lowered her face, sobbing at just the right rhythm. "I did my best. He was gone for months on business trips. Everything fell on me." Samuel stood upright, his hands clasped together to steady his trembling. Richard moved on to the letter. "This is a letter Mrs. Sarah Walker left behind. It is not behavioral evidence, but it provides context about the family and her instruction to protect the children." The letter was handed up. The judge read a portion, paused for a few seconds, then set it down. "The court acknowledges it." The courtroom was tense, like a drawn string. The judge glanced from one side to the other. "The court requires more direct evidence. Can the child speak?" Richard looked at Samuel as if asking for permission. Samuel leaned down, whispering to Emily, "You don't have to say anything if you're afraid. I'm right here." Emily looked at the high chair where the judge sat, then at her father's open hand, waiting for her. She took a short breath. I want to speak." Emily stepped up to the witness stand, Her shoes tapped softly against the wooden edge. The clerk asked her name and age. Emily answered in a small voice, "My name is Emily Walker, 6 years old." The judge nodded slightly, lowering her tone. "You only need to tell the truth." Emily looked down at her hands, then raised her head, this time staring straight ahead. She said, "If I told my dad, she would throw me and my brother out onto the street. But I can't stay silent anymore. I don't want my little brother to grow up in fear." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she did not cry. From the bench below, Samuel lifted a hand to cover his eyes, his breath escaping in a short sob. Richard set his pen down, not writing another word. The room was silent. Judge Myers leaned back in her chair, her fingers interlaced. She looked at Veronica, then at Alan. She looked at Samuel, and then back to Emily. "Thank you, child." Alan tried to recover. "Your Honor, a child's words can be influenced." The judge raised her hand. "That's enough." She turned to the clerk. "Bring me the photographs again, and summon the child protection officer waiting in the hallway to come in after the session." Then she lowered her voice to Emily. "Would you like to sit with the clerk for a while?" Emily nodded, stepped down, passed by Samuel, and paused for half a second. Samuel squeezed her hand gently. The air had just begun to loosen when Veronica's chair suddenly screeched back. She shot to her feet, pointing toward the witness stand, her voice bursting out like a lid blown off. "Liar! You're just like your mother, always pretending to be so saintly." Veronica's scream was still trembling in the courtroom when the bailiff stepped forward quickly, placing his hand out to stop her from advancing further. Judge Myers struck the gavel 3 times, his voice sharp and decisive. "Order! The defendant will sit down immediately." Veronica let out a harsh laugh, but her shoulders had stiffened. Alan tugged at her sleeve, whispering a few words in an attempt to suppress the fire that had just flared up. Richard leaned forward to shield Emily from the sight. Samuel placed the flat of his hand on his daughter's back, calming her with the gentlest touch. The judge glanced over the file once more, then raised his eyes. Based on the testimony, the photographs of the injuries, the contextual letter, along with the threatening behavior directed at a minor, the court issues an emergency protective order. The defendant, Veronica Hayes, is hereby suspended from all custody and visitation rights until a final ruling is made. Temporary custody is granted to the plaintiff, Samuel Walker. Furthermore, the court refers this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into child abuse and fraudulent conduct concerning the family trust assets. At the clerk's instruction, Carla Reyes, a social worker from the Department of Child Services, entered the room. She was about 35 years old, her voice steady, a professional who had handled many similar cases before. She bowed to the judge, then turned to Samuel. "I will coordinate to ensure safety starting right now." Emily clung even tighter to Samuel's hand. He nodded, his eyes moist. The judge paused briefly, fixing his gaze directly on Veronica. The court also notes the defendant's insulting and threatening behavior toward a child inside this courtroom. The defendant is held in contempt of court and remanded to custody for 24 hours. Veronica's eyes bulged. Alan leaned closer, lowering his voice in a desperate plea, but the bailiff had already motioned for her to follow procedure. The gavel fell one final time. "This temporary hearing is adjourned." Samuel bent down and held Emily tightly. The little girl buried her face against his shoulder, the stuffed bear wedged between her small arms. He wrapped another arm around Michael when Carla brought the boy closer, as if afraid that even the smallest gap might let the cold wind seep in. Tears poured down his face before he could wipe them away. Richard placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, silent. Outside the courthouse, the hallway exploded with the sound of camera shutters and urgent questions. A young reporter from the local station, Jenna Price, held out her microphone. "Mr. Walker, do you have anything you'd like to say to the public?" Richard stepped half a pace forward, raising his arm to shield them. "Make way, please. We are protecting the children's privacy." Samuel only bowed his head, pressing Emily and Michael close against his chest, carrying all three of them through the flood of lights as though walking through a heavy rain. Behind them, Veronica was led out through a different passage, but when she saw Samuel, she jerked violently, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. "You took everything from me. But remember this, Samuel, one day you'll pay for it." Samuel stopped for half a beat. He didn't answer. He pulled Emily closer, one hand steadying Michael's back, his head bent slightly as if shielding them beneath an invisible umbrella. The gesture itself spoke louder than any words. No one will ever touch them again. Richard leaned close to Samuel's ear and whispered, "Go home right away. I'll continue working with the prosecutor and CPS. There will be patrols around your house tonight." Carla nodded. "I'll come by to check the home environment, mostly so Emily can see that the adults are standing on her side." As they walked to the car, Jenna called out one last time, but her voice softened into a blessing. "Good luck to the three of you." Samuel turned his head and gave a small nod. Emily clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her eyes looking out the window, her breathing calmer now. Night fell quickly over the courthouse parking lot. In the back corridor, the metal door shut with a dry, sharp click. Veronica sat inside a small holding cell, the white light glaring down on a face drained pale with rage. Her hand clutched the bars so tightly her knuckles turned white. The sound of the guard's boots faded away. The room was left with nothing but her heavy breathing and the smell of cold steel. She lifted her head, staring into the darkness between the bars, whispering to herself as if swallowing the bitterness of her defeat. "Sarah, in the end, you still won. But just wait. I swear, once I'm out of this place, I won't leave your husband and children in peace." The steel door closed behind Veronica. Samuel pulled the coat around Emily and took Michael from the social worker's arms. He signed the transfer papers with Carla Reyes, listening as she gave a few reminders about home visits and the children's therapy schedule. Samuel nodded, said thank you, then carried Michael to the car, gripping Emily's hand as if the wind could sweep her away. That night, he mixed the milk, told stories, and soothed the children to sleep. The next morning, he called Richard to begin the long legal process. Life carried on like that, one day after another, built on small but steady acts. 2 years later, the sky looked clearer. Emily had grown taller, her hair tied up, her hand guiding Michael as he toddled along the brick path in the backyard garden. A small wooden sign hung on the fence, painted in white letters, Mima Sarah's garden. Tomato plants stretched up in green rows, crowned with yellow blossoms. Emily bent down to show her brother how to rest his hand on the stem without breaking it, her voice bright with excitement. "Daddy, look at this. Michael and I are growing tomatoes for you." Samuel sat back in the wooden chair, resting his notebook on his lap. He watched the children, saw in Emily the shape of an older sister who knew she was loved and was learning how to love in return. Michael stumbled forward, his tiny shoes smeared with soil, his face lifted in a wide smile. Samuel's lips curved into a gentle grin. Deep inside, he whispered a line meant only for the one no longer there. "Sarah, I did it. I kept my promise." Carla Reyes appeared at the back gate, a folder in her hand. She was still assigned to the family's case, though now the visits were only routine. Carla smiled, waved, and said, "I brought the certificate confirming the therapy program is complete. Emily is making great progress, and Michael is developing normally." Samuel rose to his feet and shook her hand. "Thank you for everything, Carla." Carla nodded. "Thank you for staying." After Carla left, Emily ran over, carrying a basket of seedlings. She dropped onto the bench beside Samuel. "Daddy, can you help me with the stakes? I didn't tie them tight enough." Samuel held the twine, showing her carefully as he explained, "Wrap it like this, snug enough to hold, but loose enough for the plant to breathe." Michael lingered nearby, every so often pressing a stone into his father's hand as though it were a gift. Samuel slipped each one into his pocket, not missing a single piece. A while later, Emily set the basket down and leaned her head against her father's shoulder. The scent of sun and soil clung to her hair, the truest perfume he had ever known. Samuel remembered the first hearing when those small shoulders trembled with fear. Now they were steady. He asked softly, "How is school?" Emily smiled. "Rosie asked me to be team leader. I told her about the garden, and she loved the story." Samuel nodded. "Tonight I'll make pasta with the first ripe tomatoes. You'll be my sous chef." Emily laughed. "Yes, Daddy." The back door opened and Mrs. Whitman carried out a plate of buttered cookies, the aroma clear in the air. She set it down on the small table, her eyes wrinkling with joy as she looked at the two children. "Have some milk, kids." She turned to Samuel. "There's a letter from Attorney Richard. He sent the schedule for the final hearing to confirm permanent custody." Samuel took the paper, scanned it quickly, and felt as if a heavy stone had finally settled firmly in place. He said, "This afternoon, after your nap, we'll stop by Uncle Richard's office, then go out for ice cream." Michael's head shot up at the word ice cream. "Ice cream!" Samuel lifted him into his arms, pretending to think, "What flavor will it be?" Michael laughed loudly. "Strawberry." Emily chimed in, "I'll choose vanilla for you, Dad, because you said vanilla goes best with Mrs. Whitman's cookies." Samuel looked at the housekeeper, and the three of them burst out laughing. That afternoon, they stopped by Richard's office. The man shook each of their hands, patted Michael's head, and handed Emily a star-shaped paper clip. "It's done," he said simply. "The rest is just living well." On the way back, Emily held the clip like a treasure, occasionally lifting it to the window so the sunlight could shine through. When they returned to the garden, the day was already fading. Samuel washed his hands and went into the kitchen. Emily stood beside him rinsing tomatoes while Michael counted strands of pasta by laying them one by one on the table like pieces of a railroad track. Samuel lit the stove, stayed garlic in the pan, and every so often glanced at his children, seeing in that picture a steady rhythm of life he once thought he could never reach again. When dinner was ready, Emily clasped her hands behind her back, cleared her throat like a tiny announcer, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the chef proudly presents Walker family pasta with tomato sauce from Mom Sarah's garden." Michael clapped. Samuel laughed heartily. "I invite our two distinguished guests to enjoy the meal." After dinner, Emily ran around the garden, then suddenly stopped, turned back, and hugged him tightly. "Dad, now we're really a family, aren't we?" Samuel lifted her onto a chair, wrapped his arms around her, and answered firmly, "Yes, and it will always be that way." Michael hugged their legs, trying to squeeze into the family embrace. Samuel gathered both children into his arms and leaned back in the chair. Night fell, but the garden stayed warm with their presence. The shadows of the three overlapped on the grass, forming one solid shape. In the corner, tomato stakes stood upright, the twine holding them just enough without choking, the way Samuel had learned to hold his family together. He looked up at the wooden sign and brushed his fingertips across Sarah's name. In that quiet moment, Samuel realized he was no longer afraid of courtrooms, flashing cameras, or empty threats. What he held now was his children's laughter, their peaceful sleep, and the steady heartbeat of a true home. Those things were not loud, but they endured. Emily yawned and nestled her head against his shoulder. Michael dozed off with a tiny green tomato still in his hand. Samuel carried them both inside, turned off the lights one by one, checked the locks, and stopped by the children's room once more. He stood at the doorway, listening to their steady breathing, then stepped back and closed the door with a gentle touch. Outside, the night breeze brushed against the fence, carrying the scent of young tomato leaves. Inside, Sarah's photograph on the shelf seemed like a quiet blessing of peace. The story closes with the image of a father and his two children in a lush green garden, with a simple yet profound confirmation. When an adult chooses to stop and listen, a child can escape the shadows. That is the simple but powerful message. The wicked will be punished, the good will be rewarded, and justice must be built upon truth, courage, and unconditional love. Samuel was not perfect, but he returned at the right time, stood up to protect Emily and Michael, and made amends through his actions every single day. We too can do the same for the children around us. What do you think about Emily's journey from silence to speaking out? Which part touched you the most? The whispered words, "Please, don't hurt me and my brother anymore," Sarah's letter, or the moment Samuel said, "I'm hey"? If it were you, what would you do when you noticed even the smallest signal of a child crying for help? Share your thoughts so we can talk together and spread the meaning of this story. I also want to ask how you are doing. Are you watching from somewhere far away late at night? Or maybe in the middle of a busy day? If today has been exhausting, I hope this story gives you a moment of peace. Don't forget to drink some water, rest your eyes, and hug your loved ones if you can. If you believe in heartwarming and emotional stories that can lift people up, share this video so that someone else might find strength too. Would you like me to continue telling more journeys of healing or dive deeper into one of the characters in this story? Leave me a comment and let me know. Thank you for being here, for listening with your whole heart. We will meet again in the next story.